Hey guys, I just wanted to give a brief overview of the prophecies in the book of Daniel. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you can see on the iPad that I'll be drawing on. Okay, perfect. So we have several prophecies in the book of Daniel. The largest of these is a period of 2300 days, and it begins in 457 BC, and it goes until 1844. So this is 2300 days or years, and it's found in Daniel 8:14. Then, within that time period, there's going to be a couple other prophecies that we're going to want to take notice of. So the largest one within that time frame is known as the 70-week prophecy, and it begins in 457 BC and goes until AD 34. The Bible verse that talks about this prophecy is found in Daniel 9, 24, and 25. And in these verses it says that from the going forth of the command to restore and to build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince would be 70 weeks. Here we have the command to restore and to build Jerusalem. We know that that command was given, according to Ezra 7:7, in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes. The ending date for this prophecy is AD 34. That was the date Stephen was stoned. Okay, during this time period, so this is known as the 70-week prophecy. 70 weeks is the same thing as 490 years, using the year-day principle, which we find in Ezekiel 4:6 and Numbers 14:34. So then the next prophecy that we're going to look at within this time frame is just 1 week or 7 years short of the 70-week prophecy, and it also begins in 457 BC, but it goes until 27 AD. So in 27 AD, this was when Jesus was baptized and the Messiah was anointed, and we learn about this in Luke 3 verse 1. And in Luke 3 it talks about how Jesus was anointed when the Holy Spirit came down on him. Then we have 31 AD when Jesus died, the crucifixion. So this time period beginning from 457 BC and going until 27 AD is the 69-week prophecy, which happens to be, according to the year-day principle, 483 years. Daniel 9:25 tells us about this. And at the end of this time period, it says that the Messiah would come. Now, after this period, the Messiah would be crucified. It says he would be cut off, but not for himself. And so this period of time, between the 69 weeks and the 70 weeks, this is the 7 years that remained. And during this time, Jesus would be cut off, and then also the covenant would be confirmed, as it says in Hebrews 2:3, by those who heard Jesus' message, by his disciples as they preached after his death, and by Jesus himself before then. And we also read about this in Daniel 9:27. So the 70-week time period in total is the probationary time that the Jews were given to turn back to God. And after this period, the Jews were no longer known as God's special people, chosen by him especially. Now anyone can be saved, whether they are a Jew or not a Jew. Also, another verse that talks about the crucifixion is Daniel 11:22. And then the next time prophecy that we have is going to be a bit longer. Yeah, this chart is not to scale, but this is going to start in 508 and it will go until 1843. So there's a couple more charts. I'm just going to go ahead and draw the lines for them, and then I'll discuss what they are. The largest one is the 1335-year prophecy, and then the next one inside that I just drew is the 1290 prophecy, and then we have the 1260-year prophecy. Okay, so the first one is in 508. Then the next line is 538. The next is 1798. And then this one is 1843. Okay, so what are these all about? Daniel 7:25 and Daniel 12:6 and 7 tell us that there would be a period of 1,260 years that would go on. Daniel 12 verse 6, there's a question asked, how long would all of these things be allowed to happen? How long would the little horn practice and prosper and the people power be allowed to rule in persecution of God's people? And the answer to that question was 1,260 years. Of 1,260 years of papal power. And although I'm writing papal power down below it, that's included in this one. I can write it here as well. Papacy rules. So now that Daniel 12:6 and 7 has asked the question, how long would the papacy be allowed to rule, and is given a time period of 1,260 years, we can use history to determine when these things occurred. The papal power lost their authority and their persecuting power in 1798 when Berthier took the Pope captive. Pope captive in 1798. Then the beginning, if we count back 1,260 years from 1798, we come to 538 when the last of the three horns of Daniel 8 were uprooted. Last horn uprooted. Now it's interesting that those three horns represented three kingdoms, and within those there was Arianism and Sabbatarianism, things that went against the Catholic faith. So then the last of the three horns were uprooted in 538, the papacy had full control to rule until 1798. Then the next time period we have here is the 1,290 years, and that went from 508 to 1798, and again, papal persecution. And then this verse, Daniel 12:11, tells us about this. In 508, the significance of that date, that is when Clovis first started uprooting those horns. And the first one was in 508, and then in 534, and then 538. And then the last of the time period is the 1,335 years. And we read about this in Daniel 12, verse 12. And Daniel said that there would be a blessing to those who waited and came to that time. The thing that happened in 1844, that was the year that the Millerites were expecting Jesus to come. Initially, they were preparing for him to come. Ellen White said that was one of the happiest years of her life, or the happiest year of her life. There was a great focus on prophecy because people thought that Jesus was coming, and there was much studying the prophecy. And that's when Daniel would stand in his lot at the end of the days. And then in 1844, just the year following that, we see Revelation 10:6 talks about there being time no longer. Hebrews 9:11 tells us that the sanctuary the Millerites thought Jesus was cleansing was not on earth, but it was actually in heaven, and that's the work that he would begin doing of the judgment in 1844. Here we have the 2300 years outlined, starting in 457 BC with the command to restore and to build Jerusalem. The dates found in Ezra 7:7, and then 70 weeks are determined upon God's people, the Jews at that time, to be given time, and that after that time frame they would no longer be God's special people. And that was significant due to the stoning of Stephen, and we read about that in Acts chapter 7. After 69 weeks, the Messiah would come. Jesus would be anointed at his baptism. And then in the midst of the 70th week, Jesus would be crucified. And then at the end of the 70 weeks, Stephen was stoned as a sign of rejection of the message, and the Jews were no longer God's favorite people. The rest of the time prophecy we have here, Daniel 12 verse 6 asks the question of how long the little horn, the papal power, would be allowed to rule. Chapter 12 verse 7 gives us the answer that that would be for 1260 years. So we know that that time period happens between 538 and 1798. And then Daniel 12:11 tells us that there's 1290 years, which happens, it has the same ending date as the 1260 years, but it begins in 508 and goes until 1798. Daniel 12:12 tells us that there would be a blessing to those who waited for the 1335 years, which was to end in 1843. So there we have a brief overview of the prophecies of the book of Daniel, and I hope it makes sense and is readable. Thank you.